ahead and remove the center cap. There's a little notch in here. You want to go ahead and just pop a screwdriver on in there and gently pry that out. Remove your center cap, set that aside. Using a 19mm socket, we want to go ahead and remove the lug nuts. With the lug nuts now removed, we're going to go ahead and remove the wheel and tire. So I'm going to use a pair of cutting pliers here. I'm going to grab that cotter pin, going to fold that out. And go ahead and remove that cotter pin. Using an 18mm socket, we're going to go ahead and remove the tie rod end nut. We're going to take that same nut, reinstall it just a few threads. We're going to go ahead and use a hammer, and we're going to strike this portion of the knuckle. This should release the tie rod end. Go ahead and remove the nut, pop the tie rod end out. So we're going to go ahead and drop the tie rod end back in, and we're going to use a 24mm wrench. I'm going to grab the lock nut here. I want to go ahead and loosen this. Okay. When I spin the nut, the inner tie rod is spinning as well. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a pair of pliers, hold the inner tie rod, and break this lock nut free. Okay, now that nut is loose, go ahead and remove this again. And go ahead and hold the inner tie rod. I'm going to go ahead and remove the outer tie rod end. Now what we're going to do is we're going to count the complete revolutions it takes to remove this off of the inner tie rod. "25 turns. While holding the inner tie rod, I want to go ahead and remove this nut, or the jam nut or lock nut. Okay. Now I want to go ahead and remove the clamp on the end of the inner boot, or the rack boot. I'm going to use a pair of pliers. And just try and work this off. Now from underneath the vehicle, you can see the rubber boot, and there is a band right here. I'm just wiping the grease off the band. There's a tab on the top of this band. We're going to go ahead and use a pair of cutting pliers, and we're going to grab a hold of that band, and we're just going to cut it and take it right off. Now you can use a long punch here or a screwdriver. We're going to go ahead and tap on this little tab right here. We want to go ahead and remove this clamp. I'm using a hammer and work that off. Okay, it's now off. You can now go ahead and grab that boot, pull it right down the shaft. Now this particular rack boot or bellows has a port for a vent. So here it is right here. And if you look on the inside, there's a metal tube, which is a vent that goes inside our bellows boot. I'm going to go ahead and install our bellows or rack boot. Now here is your port. Make sure when you install it that this lines up with the metal vent tube. Now the original metal band that we had taken off is no longer usable, so we're going to use a supplied zip tie to run around the boot. Once we have that zip tie lined up, we can go ahead and snug that down. And once that's tight, we're just going to go ahead and snip off that little pigtail there. Go ahead and make sure that's on there nice and tight. And then we'll give that a little snip. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall our clamp on the outer side here. Open that up, slide that right on over. We're going to go ahead and install our jam nut or a lock nut. I did put a little bit of grease on there after we cleaned up the threads. We're going to go ahead and install our outer tire on. Now we had counted 25 turns, and so we're going to go ahead and spin this on 25 full turns. This will give us a preliminary alignment setting. Once this is all completed and reassembled, you do want to go down and get an alignment. Now we're ready to go ahead and install our tie rod end into our knuckle. Go ahead and get our nut started. And I'm going to go ahead and torque that down. Torque this down to 41 foot-pounds. Once we have the castle nut lined up with the hole in the threaded portion, go ahead and install your cotter pin. want to go ahead and take the excess on the cotter pin, fold it over, use your cutters, snip off the excess, and you're all set. I'm going to go ahead and tighten down our jam nut. Once that's tight, we're going to go ahead and take a pair of pliers and just line up the tie rod end so it's nice and level. Let's go ahead and install our wheel. Going to install our lug nuts. I'm going to start all these by hand, and then we'll zip them down and tighten them up. I'm going to go ahead and torque our lug nuts down to 98 foot-pounds. Now, installing your center cap, you're going to have these 5 rings on the back that snap over your lug nuts here, so line those up. And then gently give it a bonk.